Eu sei, hoje não é dia de haver vídeo no canal. Mas eu não queria deixar de partilhar com vocês aqui no canal esta prenda que a Leia me deu de poder ir ao Fólio entrevistar a autora Paula DiPerna, que escreveu As Descobertas da Madame Cristóvão Colombo. Acontece que a Madame Cristóvão Colombo, mulher de Colombo, obviamente, era portuguesa. Era Dona Filipa e era filha de um descobridor de Madeira, Prestrelo. Ora, esta história é muito nossa e a Leia convidou-me para ir ao Fólio entrevistar a autora e eu, claro que aceitei. Quero agradecer muito à Leia, quero agradecer muito à editora da Paula o facto de me ter convidado para esta pequena entrevista e não quero deixar de a partilhar convosco. Portanto, hoje tenho aqui a entrevista. Amanhã sai a minha opinião sobre este livro, mas já vos digo que é fantástico. É um pouco da nossa história, muito da história mundial e nada que eu soubesse, pelo menos eu. Se alguém sabe, então depois diga nos comentários. Então, vemo-nos amanhã. E agora, aproveitem. First of all, thank you for talking with me, and I have enjoyed very much your book. So, first of all, why Miss Colombo and not Colombo himself?
Because Colombo was a known enterprise, a known person, and Mrs. Columbus wasn't. And also, I think women do have a different point of view. I mean, I don't like to exaggerate that, but I became intrigued by the fact that somehow somebody became so famous and met kings and changed the history of the world without a woman involved. It doesn't make any sense to me. And then I bumped into the facts of her life, and it began to come together like a puzzle. And Portugal, of course, the role of Portugal at that time in exploring the world and navigating all over, and they came so close to funding Columbus and sending Columbus on the trip, and that his wife turns out to be Portuguese. I thought there has to be a story here. You know, there has to be more to it than everybody knows. So I went after it because I like to find things out that are new.
A woman in that century going on a trip is something very modern. Why? Why she goes with him?
Because she had to see it for herself, you know, the idea, and that's a good point, because I struggle with that as a technique, you know, would it be believable that she was on the ship? And so I put her on the ship right at the front, because I thought if the reader is too deeply involved in the 15th century, and then I put her on the ship, it would be hard for them to believe in it. But paragraph 1, she's on the ship. The cabin boy knocked and I put my pen and paper away. She's on the ship already and writing already, 2 things women didn't do. And I thought, just get that in front, and then you can drop back into the flashback. And by that point, people will believe that she could have gone on the trip. It's also true that women did more than we know. You know, we always have this impression that in history women were doing nothing or no one allowed them to do things, but they were doing things. Would she have ever been going on such a journey? I doubt it, but there's no reason to assume not.
Of course, why not?
Yeah.
You go to chapter 3 and you present Filipa. Mm-hmm. The Portuguese people doesn't know about Filipa.
Right.
Why just on chapter 3?
Because again, I thought, get to know her as any woman. Get to know her as a woman who is, first of all, maybe keeping secrets because she's writing things down. You know, get to know her because she's on a ship, and what is she doing on the ship? It could be any woman in the first place. And I wanted to establish her more or less as anybody, and then we begin to find out who she was and what she's doing there. Because I think with historical fiction, you have to be careful not to try to be a librarian. You're not a historian. And I tried deliberately not to tell the story in chronological order for that reason.
You do something I think is wonderful, because it's a book about history, but it's not a lesson about history. It's the story of a woman with her problems, with her thoughts, with her things, with her feelings, because she is a woman, she's just a woman, who married Colombo, and who believed that Colombo can do that trip. She talks, apparently, to the reader. I think that creates sympathy as a way of doing literature. Why do you put her to it was because it was a journal, because she talks with us all over the books. I feel that. I thought she talks to me all over the book.
Well, that's wonderful. I mean, I think, again, the idea that she couldn't talk to anybody, that in that situation that she was in, as you know, she starts to feel that she can't talk to him, she can't talk to her mother, her grandmother even. She couldn't talk to anybody about what she was starting to feel. And so I thought the journal format worked, because then she would talk to her journal, but also not so privately, because she was a big thinker.
Yes, she was.
She was a big thinker, and that was the most important thing for me to get across, that she was a big thinker, and for all we know, she used him for her own purpose, which was to make the trip. She couldn't make it without him, so she possibly used him. But
he used her also.
And he also used her. He definitely, I'm convinced he definitely used her in fact. But the journal form, I thought, was a way of her to draw in the reader and also share more. We use that modern word, share, which I don't like so much. But to unveil herself, but in a semi-private way. And if you felt that she was talking to you, I'm thrilled, because she was.
I thought so. I liked also very much the description. It is a movie to me.
Thank you.
It was like a movie. Do you think that your work with I forgot the name, Cousteau helped or not?
That's another good question. It's possible. But I was telling someone today, so my first article, you're a journalist, you'll understand. My first major article was a contract I had with the New York Times Magazine. And I went to do the story, and they sent a photographer with me. And I wrote the story, and it was rejected, even with the contract. And they said, it's just boring. And I was heartbroken, because it was a big break, and I had failed back to risk. And then I thought, okay, what's wrong with this? And I read it again with cold eyes, and I thought, it's not that it's boring, but we don't see anything. We don't see anything. And I realized that we didn't see anything because I hadn't paid attention, because the photographer was taking the pictures. Not to say that I would want to be the photographer, but I know that in the writing process, I let the visuals go. And after that experience, I started trying to think more visually as a writer. And then, of course, with Cousteau, it was all about visuals. And writing for film for him, it was minimum words. The images were the paramount thing. And so when I was in Cuba reading Columbus's journal, and he used almost no description, and I could see with my own eyes the beauty of where we were, I thought, okay, if I do this book, it's got to be as if it was a camera. So I'm very glad that came across.
Yes, it crossed me. I'm also a Portuguese teacher, so the vocabulary of the natives, the people they found, how do you imagine it?
Well, there are things written about that, and I was able to use history there in terms of what they called things, and most everything that happens in the Caribbean happened in one way or another in real life among those people. I was a little bit, we now refer to people of those times as Native Americans, not Indians. But I felt she could never say Native Americans in the 15th century, so I used some vocabulary that's, of course, out of date now. But I was able to do a lot of research on the Caribbean Indians, who were Native Americans, who were there. And it's also true, Columbus made 4 voyages, maybe even 5. And the first one, which is the one that I write about, he was still exploring, more or less. There were things that weren't correct, which you can discover in the book, but not like the third or fourth voyage, which really became very butchery. And it was because more and more he was getting pressure. He wasn't getting to the east. He wasn't showing Isabella any results. So he became more and more, you could even say, crazed. And at the end, he kind of fell apart.
Felipe, she found love not with Colombo, but with Martin. I love the description, but it's the description of, for a modern woman, it's something common. So to Felipe was something uncommon.
Right.
Do you think that woman in that century, love was like Felipe and Colombo and not like Felipe and Martin?
So, I mean, we don't know. Right? Our assumption is it was more like the love between Felipe and Colombo. A little bit closed, a little bit tight, not certain things.
She
not
doesn't
said.
see Colombo naked, for instance.
For instance, yeah, exactly. And I thought, well, who knows? It probably wasn't as cloistered as we think. But again, I didn't want to, the book had to be open. Everything about it had to be open. And so she falls in love with Martin, and this is, a tremendous opening to her. And, if I'm not an academic, but if I was going to review my own book, you could say, well, it becomes metaphorical. The opening of a new world and all the things that happen with her and him, it's a metaphor in a way, but it's also just a single story of a woman who changes the way she views men and views, her role in her passions. Passion is the key here.
You wrote something like a woman who got on a trip is a masculine woman. For 5th century or for 21st century?
Well, I mean, we all go on trips now. I mean, I think we have a wrong idea of masculinity, which is a kind of power capsule. And, I think feminism has in some ways exaggerated that. But in the end, going on trips is imaginative. And I think women have, a huge amount of power, a huge power of imagination. You could never become pregnant. You would never want to have a child. You would never embark on that journey without imagination. And this is something that only women do. And I think I've never had a child, but I mean, I know enough women who have had children, and this is a big journey. And so I started thinking, well, if women can have children, why couldn't she have gone on that ship? It just became. And some people could say, well, you made it possible because these were my own biases. But when I read it now again, I don't think it was. It was really, as I said, it almost wrote itself. It seemed believable to me in the settings that I was. And
to me also.
So I just wanted to say maybe everything we thought about the 15th century should be revisited. And if it worked for you, it will maybe work for other people.
Yeah, it worked for me. Marvelous. What are you reading now? Who are your writers of election?
So I would like you to suggest a contemporary Portuguese writer in English that I could read. I don't have anybody Portuguese on my list, but I love the work of Elif Shafak, writes is a Turkish writer. And
we have translated in Portuguese.
Amor Tolls, a gentleman in Moscow. I love that book. Also, there's an Italian writer named, she's a dentist, and her name is Pier della Antonio, and she wrote 2 fantastic books, one called A Girl Returned, and the other A Sister's Story, and these are set in Italy, in Abruzzo, which is where my grandparents came from. So those are on my table.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.